The bell rang, its sharp sound cutting through the noise of the students flooding into the classroom. Chairs scraped against the floor, and the chatter filled the room as everyone found their seats. But in the very last row, near the window, Caleb sat alone. His desk was the farthest from the teacher's desk, and he always chose it on purpose. Caleb wasn't like the others. He didn't laugh, talk, or even look up when the others passed by. He just sat there, staring at his desk or looking out the window, as if the world outside was more interesting than the chaos inside. Some people thought he was shy. Others thought he didn't care. But Caleb just didn't feel like talking. He wasn't like the loud kids who made everyone laugh, or the ones who were always in the middle of everything. He was quiet. He liked it that way. Today, as the last students sat down and the room settled, Mr. Peterson walked to the front of the class. He was one of those teachers who thought he knew everything about everyone. He had a way of looking at Caleb that made him feel small, like Caleb was hiding something the teacher was determined to find out. "All right, class," Mr. Peterson said, his voice sharp. "We've got a big math test today, so I expect everyone to do their best." He paused for a moment, looking over the class. His eyes landed on Caleb. "Especially you, Caleb. I'm sure you'll surprise us all today. Let's see if you can finally show us you belong here." The class snickered, but Caleb didn't flinch. He kept his eyes on the test paper in front of him, as if it was the most important thing in the world. Mr. Peterson, on the other hand, was watching him closely, as if he were waiting for Caleb to crack. The test began, and the room grew quiet. Caleb worked through the questions methodically, his pen moving quickly as he solved the problems. He had always been good at math. He didn't need to study like the others, but he didn't brag about it. He just did what he had to do and kept his head down. Around him, other students were struggling. Some whispered answers to each other, while others stared blankly at their papers, clearly lost. Caleb didn't notice any of it. His world was focused on the numbers and equations in front of him. As the class slowly finished, Caleb put down his pen, his test complete. He leaned back in his chair, staring out the window again. His mind wasn't on the test. It never was. It was on something far beyond school, far beyond the noise of his classmates. Mr. Peterson walked down the aisles, collecting the tests. He paused when he reached Caleb's desk, his eyes narrowing. Caleb could feel the teacher's gaze on him, but he didn't react. He had learned a long time ago to ignore the stares. Well, Mr. Peterson said, looking at Caleb's test. "It looks like you actually know something. Who would have guessed?" His tone was mocking, but Caleb didn't respond. He didn't need to. He had heard it all before. The students around Caleb were still talking, still whispering, but Caleb wasn't paying attention. He couldn't care less about what they said. He was used to being ignored. In fact, he preferred it that way. After the test, as the bell rang, students began to file out of the room, their voices loud and full of excitement. Caleb stayed in his seat, packing up his things slowly, taking his time. He wasn't in any rush to leave. When the last student had gone, Mr. Peterson stopped by Caleb's desk once more. This time, his voice was more serious, though it still carried that hint of mockery. "You know, Caleb," he said, leaning down close to the desk, "maybe you should try talking once in a while. It's not healthy to keep everything inside. You might actually make some friends." Caleb didn't look up. He just closed his notebook and stood up, taking his bag in one smooth motion. "Maybe," he said quietly, "but I'm fine." Mr. Peterson watched him leave the room, his expression puzzled. Caleb was different, and Mr. Peterson didn't like things that were different. He liked to think he had everyone figured out, but Caleb was a mystery, and mysteries made him uncomfortable. As Caleb walked down the hall, he felt the eyes of his classmates on him, but he didn't care. He had long since stopped trying to fit in. It was easier this way. Quieter, calmer. At home that night, Caleb sat at his desk, his laptop open in front of him. His fingers hovered over the keys for a moment before he typed something. Lines of code filled the screen, his work taking shape. It wasn't just homework or a project. It was something far more important. His grandfather had taught him to keep his abilities hidden, to blend in and not draw attention. But Caleb couldn't help it. His mind was different. His skills, honed over years of secret training, were far beyond the simple lessons of high school. And no one, not even Mr. Peterson, had any idea just how much he knew. As he finished typing, Caleb closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair. He didn't mind the silence. It was in the silence that he did his best work. And tomorrow, things would be different. He could feel it in the air. Something was about to change. And when it did, no one would ever underestimate him again. The next day, the atmosphere in the school was charged with an unspoken tension. Caleb had never been the center of attention, and he liked it that way. But something had changed. His quiet confidence, his unwillingness to engage, had started to bother people. They couldn't understand why he didn't talk, why he didn't play by the same rules they did. And as Caleb soon discovered, there were consequences for that. As the bell rang, Caleb made his way to class. The hallway buzzed with the chatter of students, most of them still recovering from their excitement over the recent math test. But as Caleb walked by, he could feel their eyes on him. Whispers followed him, and he didn't need to hear the words to know they were talking about him. "He's so weird," one of the girls muttered. "Why does he always sit in the back?" Another added, her voice dripping with curiosity. Caleb ignored them. He always had. Let them talk. It didn't matter to him. What mattered was getting through the day without causing any more trouble. He didn't want to be noticed, but his silence made him stand out more than he realized. When he entered the classroom, the usual routine unfolded. Students filled in, each one finding their seat and settling in for the day. Mr. Peterson walked in a moment later, his eyes scanning the room before they landed on Caleb. There was that same look again. Caleb didn't flinch. He simply took his seat in the back corner, the farthest from the teacher's desk. But as the day went on, Caleb began to notice something unusual. The whispers weren't just about him anymore. They were louder, more frequent. A few students even turned around to stare at him openly, trying to catch his attention. Caleb felt the heat of their gaze but refused to meet their eyes. He had learned long ago to shut out the noise. Then, during lunch, everything changed. As Caleb walked into the cafeteria, he could hear the laughter and chatter of his classmates echoing across the room. He scanned the tables, looking for a quiet spot. But there was none. Every seat seemed to be taken, and the tables were packed with groups of students who were laughing and joking together. As he hesitated, a voice interrupted his thoughts. "You can sit with us, Caleb." He turned to see Rachel, a girl from his math class, waving at him from a table near the back. She was one of the few students who had ever spoken to him directly. Caleb had never really understood why she bothered, but her invitation was a small surprise. Rachel's friends, a group of girls who sat at the table, looked at him with a mixture of curiosity and caution. They weren't exactly unfriendly, but they clearly didn't know what to make of Caleb. He was a mystery to them, just like everyone else at school. "Sure," Caleb replied quietly, shrugging off the tension that had built up inside him. Maybe sitting with them for lunch wouldn't be so bad. He sat down, and for a moment, the group fell silent. Caleb didn't mind. He was used to it. They were probably just trying to figure him out. That was all they ever did, try to figure him out. "So, Caleb," Rachel started after a few seconds, "how did you do on the test yesterday? You're always so quiet during class." The question hung in the air, and Caleb glanced at her, wondering if she had any idea what he was capable of. She probably didn't. No one did. "I did fine," he replied. He didn't need to explain any further. They didn't know that he had solved the entire test in less than 10 minutes. He wasn't bragging. He just didn't feel the need to talk about it. The other girls at the table exchanged glances, but before they could say anything, Caleb's attention shifted to the door of the cafeteria. A man in a suit had entered, walking with an air of authority. Caleb didn't recognize him, but his presence was undeniable. The man stood tall, his posture straight and confident, and his eyes scanned the room as if searching for something or someone. The man's gaze stopped at Caleb. For a brief moment, the room seemed to go quiet, as if everyone else could feel the weight of the stranger's stare. Caleb's heart skipped a beat, but he didn't react. He simply returned the man's gaze, curious about who he was and what he was doing here. The man slowly walked toward Caleb's table, his steps steady and purposeful. Rachel and her friends didn't seem to notice him at first, but Caleb felt the tension building in the air. What was going on? "Caleb Johnson?" the man asked, his voice deep and authoritative. Caleb looked up at him, his brow furrowing slightly. He didn't recognize the man, but there was something familiar about his presence, something that made Caleb's instincts tell him to be careful. "That's me," Caleb replied, his voice calm. But he couldn't help the slight edge of curiosity in his tone. Who was this man? The stranger smiled faintly, his gaze flicking briefly to the girls at the table before returning to Caleb. "I'm here for you," he said simply. At those words, the room seemed to go completely still. Caleb's heart raced, but he didn't let his surprise show. What did the man mean? Why was he here for him? The girls at the table stared at Caleb, confusion written on their faces. They had no idea who this man was or what he wanted with Caleb. But Caleb's mind was racing. The man was clearly someone important. He didn't look like a regular visitor, and the way he spoke, so calmly, so assured, told Caleb that this wasn't just some random person who had wandered into the school. "I'm afraid I can't discuss the details right here," the man continued, his voice dropping lower. "But I need you to come with me." The word hung in the air, and Caleb knew that his life was about to change forever. No one had ever come to him like this before. No one had ever looked at him like this man had. As Caleb stood up from the table, the eyes of everyone in the cafeteria were on him. The whispers began again, but this time they were louder. The man was waiting for Caleb to follow him, and Caleb didn't hesitate. Something was pulling him forward, something that told him he needed to know more. The door of the cafeteria opened, and the man walked out. Caleb followed him, knowing that his life was about to take a turn he never could have imagined. What was waiting for him outside those school doors? Only time would tell. Caleb followed the man through the hallway, his mind racing. Each step echoed, growing louder in his ears as they moved farther from the cafeteria and deeper into the school's quiet corridors. The stranger moved with purpose, his pace steady and assured, as if he knew exactly where he was going. Students scattered around them as they walked, too caught up in their own worlds to notice the serious-looking man with Caleb. But Caleb couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some ordinary school visit. He had seen enough in his short life to recognize that something important was unfolding. "Who are you?" Caleb asked, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't fear that drove his question, it was curiosity. His life had been uneventful up until now, and the sudden change had left him off balance. But he wasn't afraid. He knew that whoever this man was, he was connected to something bigger than Caleb could comprehend. The man glanced over his shoulder, his expression unreadable. "I'm here because you're needed. You don't understand yet, but you will." Caleb's brows furrowed. Needed for what? The man didn't answer immediately. Instead, they stopped at a door near the back of the school, one Caleb hadn't noticed before. The hallway here was dimly lit, the only sound the quiet hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. The man turned to Caleb and looked at him for a long moment, his eyes scanning Caleb's face as if weighing him up. "What's your name?" the man asked suddenly. "Caleb," he replied. "Caleb Johnson." The man nodded, as if confirming something in his mind. "You're not just a normal student here, Caleb. You're more important than you realize." Caleb blinked in surprise. "What do you mean?" "I'm just a kid from the neighborhood." The man gave a small, almost imperceptible smile. "That's what I'm here to explain. But not here." Not now. He pushed open the door, revealing a small private office. The walls were lined with bookshelves, each packed with books and papers. There were no windows, no distractions, just a simple desk and 2 chairs. The man gestured for Caleb to sit in one of the chairs as he took the other. "Do you know who I am?" the man asked, his voice softer now, though it still carried an air of authority. "No," Caleb replied honestly, "but I have a feeling you're not just some random visitor." "You're right," the man said with a nod. "My name is Colonel William Anderson. I work for a government agency that monitors, well, certain things. People, events, things you wouldn't believe." Caleb sat up straighter in his chair, intrigued despite himself. The word government always carried weight, but the way the man spoke made it seem like he was talking about something far bigger than just a normal job. "I'm here because we've been watching you, Caleb," Colonel Anderson continued, his eyes never leaving Caleb's face. "You have something special. A gift." Caleb's heart skipped a beat. "A gift." The man nodded. "It's not something you've fully understood yet, but it's there. Your mind works differently from others. You're quick. You're focused. But it's more than that. You're on the edge of something much greater." Caleb's mind raced. Was he being paranoid, or was this man actually serious? His quiet demeanor, his love for solving puzzles in the back of the class, was all of that leading to something bigger? "Why me?" Caleb asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The man leaned forward, his gaze intense. "You've been living in the shadows, Caleb. Not because you wanted to, but because it was necessary. You've been hiding your potential. But now, we need you to step forward. There are people who have been watching you for a very long time, and they're waiting for you to realize what you can do." Caleb's mind was spinning. The thought that someone, anyone, had been watching him was unsettling. He was just a quiet student. He didn't ask for this attention. He didn't want it. But now, the idea that there was something inside him, something he didn't even know about, was both exciting and terrifying. "I don't understand," Caleb admitted. "Why now? Why me?" The man stood up and walked toward the bookshelf, picking up a thick file. He opened it and flipped through the pages, scanning them quickly before he spoke again. "Because, Caleb, you're not just a student. You're a part of something much bigger, something that has been set in motion for years, and now we need you to play your role in it." The file was thick with documents and images Caleb couldn't see, but the weight of what was in it was unmistakable. He had no idea what the man meant, but the urgency in his voice was undeniable. And as Caleb's eyes flickered from the file to the man's face, he knew something had changed. His life, the life he had always known, was over. It was time for him to face whatever was coming next. The man closed the file and looked at Caleb once more. "You've been chosen. You won't be alone in this. We've got your back, but we need you to trust us." The words hung in the air like a promise of something bigger, something that Caleb wasn't sure he was ready for. His quiet life, his silence, had been his shield. But now it was being taken from him, and there was no turning back. Colonel Anderson reached for his phone and dialed a number, speaking in low tones, his words sharp and quick. Caleb couldn't make out what he was saying, but the serious nature of the conversation made it clear. Something was happening, and Caleb was at the center of it. When the colonel hung up, he turned back to Caleb. "We need you to leave now. Everything is about to change." Caleb nodded, his mind still reeling. He didn't understand all of this. He wasn't sure he ever would, but he knew one thing for certain. His life was never going to be the same again. Caleb stepped out of the room, his mind still reeling. The quiet, simple life he'd always known had been shattered by Colonel Anderson's words. It was as if a door had been opened, revealing a whole new world that Caleb had never even considered. He hadn't asked for this, hadn't chosen to be part of anything bigger, but now it seemed like he had no choice. As he walked through the hallways of the school, his footsteps felt heavier than usual. Every noise around him seemed louder, sharper, as if the world had shifted just a little bit, and he could feel it. He glanced around at the other students, laughing, talking, oblivious to the whirlwind that was unfolding around him. They had no idea that Caleb's life was about to become part of something much bigger than any of them could imagine. He stepped outside, into the cool air, and stood for a moment, taking in the familiar sights of the school parking lot. His car was parked near the entrance, but he couldn't bring himself to go back to it. It was like everything in his life had been a lie. He had been living in the shadows, unnoticed, and now the spotlight was on him, and he wasn't sure how to handle it. "Caleb," a voice called from behind him. He turned to find Colonel Anderson walking toward him, his face serious but not unkind. The man's presence had a way of commanding attention, and Caleb couldn't ignore the weight of his next words. "Are you ready for this?" the colonel asked, his tone calm but with an edge of urgency. Caleb swallowed hard. "I don't know if I'm ready," he admitted. "This is all too much." The colonel nodded, as if he expected Caleb to say that. "No one is ever fully ready for this kind of thing. But it's happening whether you're ready or not. You can't turn back now. You've already been chosen. The question is whether or not you're going to rise to the occasion." Caleb took a deep breath. He wanted to say no. He wanted to turn away and go back to his quiet life, back to being the kid who sat in the back of the class and kept to himself. But the truth was, he couldn't do that. There was a force inside him, something that called out, urging him to step up, to face whatever was coming. "I don't even know what's happening," Caleb said, frustration creeping into his voice. "I'm just a kid." The colonel's gaze softened. "You're more than just a kid, Caleb. You've been living in the shadows for far too long. You have the potential to change things, to make things right, but only if you decide to fight." Caleb felt a chill run down his spine at the words. What was this fight? What was he supposed to be changing? The colonel stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I know it's overwhelming, but trust me when I say this. There are people out there who want to use you. They want to control you. And if you don't act now, they'll take everything from you. But you have a chance to stop them." Caleb's heart raced. Who are these people? The colonel didn't answer immediately. Instead, he took a step back and gestured to the car waiting near the curb. Caleb didn't even notice when it had arrived, but now he saw the dark tinted windows and the sleek black exterior. It was a military vehicle, one that Caleb had seen in action movies, but never up close. It looked like something out of a spy thriller. "Get in," Colonel Anderson said. "We're going to take you to where it all begins." Caleb hesitated for a moment. He wasn't sure if he was ready for this, but deep down, he knew it was too late to back out. Whatever was happening, it was bigger than him. And maybe that was the point. Maybe he was meant to be part of this larger world. "Okay," Caleb said finally. "I'm ready." The colonel gave him a nod of approval and opened the door to the vehicle. Caleb climbed in, feeling the weight of the decision pressing down on him. His life was no longer his own, and there was no going back. As the car sped through the streets, Caleb glanced out the window, trying to make sense of everything that was happening. The world outside seemed so ordinary, so unchanged. Yet here he was, on the verge of something that could change everything. The car finally pulled up to a large gated building that Caleb didn't recognize. It was tall and imposing, surrounded by high fences and guards. He wondered what kind of place this was, and why it was so secretive. Colonel Anderson turned to him. "This is where it starts, Caleb. Everything you've been trained for, everything you've been hiding inside yourself, it begins here." Caleb stared at the building, feeling a mix of dread and anticipation. He didn't know what lay ahead, but for the first time in his life, he felt like he was on the edge of something huge. And then, before he could say anything else, the doors to the building opened, and a man in a suit stepped out. His face was stern, his posture rigid, as though he was waiting for something. "This is it," Colonel Anderson said. The moment that changes everything. Caleb took a deep breath and stepped out of the car. Whatever happened next, he knew one thing. There was no turning back now. Caleb stood at the entrance of the building, the weight of the world pressing on his shoulders. Every step he took felt heavier than the last, but he couldn't stop now. He couldn't turn back. This was where it all began. As the door slowly creaked open, he stepped into the dimly lit hallway. The air was thick with tension, as if the building itself was holding its breath, waiting for something monumental to happen. The walls were lined with portraits of people Caleb didn't recognize, their eyes staring down at him with an unsettling intensity. The whole place felt like it belonged to another world, one where he was an outsider. The man in the suit, who had been waiting for him outside, motioned for him to follow. Caleb's heart pounded in his chest as he walked behind him, each step echoing loudly in the silence. He didn't know what he was walking into, but the sense of dread that had been lingering in his stomach only grew stronger the closer they got to the center of the building. They entered a large room, cold and sterile. It had an almost military feel to it, with a single long table in the middle and several high-backed chairs surrounding it. At the far end of the room sat a group of people, men and women in suits, their faces stern and unreadable. They looked like they had been waiting for him, like they knew exactly who he was and why he was there. One of them, a woman with sharp features and an air of authority, stood up as Caleb entered. She gave him a look that sent chills down his spine. "Caleb," she said, her voice smooth but firm, "we've been expecting you." Caleb's mouth went dry, and he found himself unable to speak. He wasn't ready for this. None of it. He had no idea what was going on, what these people wanted from him, or what his role was in any of this. But he knew one thing. It was too late to walk away now. "You must be wondering why you're here," the woman continued, as if reading his mind. "You've been chosen for something far bigger than anything you've ever known. A job that requires strength, intelligence, and resolve. A job that will change the course of everything." Caleb felt his legs grow weak. This was insane. What could he, a quiet, overlooked teenager, possibly do to change anything? He wasn't the hero. He wasn't the one who was supposed to be saving the day. But then the woman smiled, and there was a glint of something in her eyes that Caleb couldn't place. "You've been trained for this your entire life," she said. "You just didn't know it yet." Before Caleb could respond, Colonel Anderson stepped forward. "It's time, Caleb. You're the key to all of this. You have the power, the potential, to shape the future, but only if you're willing to fight for it." The words hung in the air, thick with expectation. Caleb felt his heart racing, his palms sweating. He wanted to run. He wanted to scream that this wasn't him, that he was just a kid, a quiet boy who had never asked for any of this. But something deep inside him, something he couldn't explain, told him that he had no choice but to go forward. He looked at the people in the room, all of them staring at him, waiting for him to make the next move. The silence was deafening, and for the first time in his life, Caleb understood what it meant to truly feel the weight of a decision. The pressure of something huge, something world-altering, was pushing down on him. "You have two choices," the woman said. "You can walk away and live your life as it is, but you'll always wonder what might have been. Or you can take your place here with us, and you'll never be the same. You'll change the world, Caleb." Her words were like a hammer striking an anvil in his mind. Change the world. Was he ready for that? Was he even capable of something so big? Or was he just a kid who had gotten caught up in something far beyond his control? But as Caleb stood there, staring at the faces of those around him, he realized something. This wasn't just about him anymore. It wasn't about his quiet life or his fear of the unknown. It was about what he could do, what he could become. This was his moment, the moment when everything would change. He took a deep breath, steadying himself. "I'm ready." The woman's smile grew wider, and the room seemed to exhale, as if a weight had been lifted. Colonel Anderson nodded, a small spark of approval in his eyes. "Good," the woman said, her voice now firm and commanding. "Then welcome to your new life, Caleb. Welcome to the mission." Caleb felt a shiver run through him, not from fear, but from a sudden surge of energy. For the first time, he felt the fire of something burning inside him. This was it. His life had just taken a turn he never could have imagined, and there was no going back. As they led him deeper into the building, Caleb knew one thing for certain. He wasn't just a quiet, overlooked teenager anymore. He was something more. And whatever came next, he was going to face it head on.